If you want a sense of the enormity of today's video, all you need to see is the thickness of my stack of note cards. Sega! Alright, so this is a video that has been a long time in the making. This is the Next 10, the Sega Genesis edition. So if you'll remember last year, I uploaded a video called the Next 10 TurboGrafx 16 or something like that. And the premise was we were going to take the universally agreed upon top 10 TurboGrafx 16 Hue card games and just sort of set those aside. And I was going to talk about what would be, for me, my next 10 favorite games. And so I decided that next we would do the Sega Genesis. Now, for the TurboGrafx 16, it only had about 100 Hue card games released. So the top 10 represented 10% of that system's library. But the Sega Genesis had something like 707 releases. So, a top 10 would only be like, a little over 1%, 1.5%, something like that. So instead of doing a top 10, we have a top 25 list that I'm going to read off to you. And then after that, I'll talk about what would be my next 10 Sega Genesis games. Quickly though, before we get started, with the TurboGrafx 16 video, it was very easy because there was a thread that had been created on the PC Engine FX forums where they already had like a crowdsourced top 10 list. Unfortunately, with the Sega Genesis, I didn't have that. Somebody started something like that on the Sega 16 forums, but they didn't finish it. So this was a little bit more difficult to put together. So I have to give a huge thank you to a viewer by the name of Ian, who actually put the top 25 list together for me. I don't exactly know. He tried to explain to me how he did it, but I don't really understand. Like, he's into statistics and whatnot. And so he was able to take lots of different top however many lists, whether they were ranked or not, and put them into, I don't know if he used a Python script, I have no idea, and was able to come up with this crowdsourced top 25 list. So huge thank you, Ian, for doing that for me. So, basically I have 35 games to talk about here, so we don't really have a lot of time to screw around. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So as we did last time, I'm going to count down this top 25 list. Again, this is not my top 25. This is just the top 25 list that that was created. So I'm going to count down those backwards as we do. So at number 25, we have Ghouls and Ghosts. And I was really happy to see Ghouls and Ghosts make the list, only because it's one of my favorite Sega Genesis games. But, a lot of people complain that it's difficult or, it's not arcade perfect. It was a very, very early release. It came out in 1989. It was, I have it on my card here, it was one of the first 3 post-launch games released in October of 1989. I, of course, covered this game in my Sega Genesis in 1989 video. The 2 games that came out before it were Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf and World Championship Soccer. So really, this was the first non-sports game released for the Sega Genesis post-launch. It was also, everybody knows that Ghouls and Ghosts started out in the arcade, but it was released in the arcade by Capcom in December of '88. So this was less than a year after the game made its debut in the arcade that it came out on the Genesis. As a kid, I spent a lot of time playing Ghosts and Goblins, because my neighbor across the street had the NES cartridge. And it's funny because we didn't really like the game that much. It was very difficult, but it was also very buggy. That NES conversion was done by a company called Micronix, who sucks. But this, I think everybody knows this by now, but this Genesis version of Ghouls and Ghosts was programmed by Yuji Naka, who would of course go on to lead Sonic Team. It seems like it was the case pretty often that you had a lot of games that were being, they were originally developed by some other developer, but then when they were released on the Genesis, the conversion was programmed internally, so it's not really a third-party game. What else have I got here? That's all I have on here. But yeah, I mean, I love the game. Everybody says how difficult it is. And to me, it's like difficult in the way that like Contra is difficult. Like you just have, it takes a lot of memorization, but once you've got it memorized, I think the game is not really too terribly tough. So that, Ghouls and Ghosts at number 25. Number 24 is Streets of Rage 3. And this was another one that I was just really happy to see make the list, because Streets of Rage 3 gets kind of dumped on by a lot of people. And certainly, by the way, came out in June of 1994. And was actually programmed by a company called Ancient, which was owned by Yuzo Koshiro. So everybody thinks of the Streets of Rage games as being first-party games, but Streets of Rage 2 and 3 were actually both programmed by Ancient, working, I assume, sort of hand in hand with Sega. Anyway, you know, like I'll concede that Streets of Rage 3 is the worst game in the Streets of Rage series, but it's still better than, you know, 90% of the beat 'em up games out there. I think part of the problem is people are unhappy with the North American version, just because it was kind of censored or had things altered. Some of it's just little stuff, like I don't understand why they changed the clothing of so many of the characters. Like, you know, my go-to guy for Streets of Rage is Axel. And, you know, I always think of Axel, he had a white t-shirt and blue jeans on, and for some reason in Streets of Rage 3, he has like a yellow top and like black pants on. I don't really get that. Then there was like the Dominatrix enemies, which for the American release, they kind of changed the color palette for them so that it looks like they're wearing more clothes. And then I wrote on here somewhere, yeah, Elektra has mom jeans. It looks like Elektra's wearing mom jeans. And again, that's in the American version. The North American plot is totally different. I don't know why you would bother doing that. But some cool things that Streets of Rage 3 did, you could run. That was the first time that you could run. Weapons are limited use. I don't care for that. That, you know, you'd pick up, like if you picked up a bat, the bat has like its own life bar. And I guess I understand why they would do that, because that way you can't just carry around like a pipe or something for the whole game. But, because I think you can also pick up a gun, if I remember correctly, and that makes sense because that would only have limited ammunition. But I mean, I feel like you could beat up a lot of people with a bat, and it's not like the bat is gonna break. The other thing I wrote down on here is just something that kind of bothers me a little bit, is that Streets of Rage 3, the first level, you're inside of like a warehouse. And, you know, the first two Streets of Rage games, you start off on very similar looking, like, you know, downtown streets. And I don't know why they changed that, but I kind of just didn't like it. I also put on here that it's harder. Like, at least in my opinion, Streets of Rage 3 is like the hardest one. So that is number 24. Number 23, coming out in November of 1990, also has gotten covered on my show already, is Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. And, you know, that's a game that's ostensibly aimed at kids, but at least in my opinion is enough of a solid platformer that I think anybody who's interested in the genre should check it out. And then I wrote this on the card. I don't know what it really has to do with anything. I wrote, do kids even know who Mickey Mouse is anymore? Just because I feel like, you know, if a game like that comes out now, are kids really going to care? Like, I know they released a Mickey Mouse game. I think, wasn't it on the Wii, I believe? But I don't know how popular it really would be with kids. Like, anybody out there, if you have kids who are like, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, like, ask them like if they know who Mickey Mouse is, and I wonder if they actually would know or not. That is number 23. 22 is Shining Force. And so one thing I wanted to mention is I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I've played, you know, every good game that's out there to be played. I feel like some other YouTubers, sometimes they try to sort of, you know, make it seem like, you know, they've played everything and they're like experts, and I don't claim to be that. So there are plenty of good games out there that I have yet to play, and Shining Force would be an example of a game that I have played very, very little. But I know how well regarded it is. One thing I kind of don't understand, and that may be because I haven't played the game enough, is people talk about how it's this tactical RPG, and so like in my head, I feel like it's going to be more like Final Fantasy Tactics or something, but from the limited amount of time I spent playing with it, to me it still feels like you're playing a Japanese role-playing game, It's just that the battle is different, right? There's more tactics involved with the battle, which to me just made it feel more like an American RPG in that way, like Ultima or any of the advanced Dungeons and Dragons games, I think. Well, I guess not all of them play like that, I suppose. But you know, you move your character around on a map, and there's just a little bit more strategy and tactics to the battle system. But I still feel like it had the flavor of a JRPG. So. Yeah, what else did I put here? Yeah, that's about it. Oh, that came out, by the way, in July of 1993. Number 21 is M.U.S.H.A, which here in North America, and I think in Europe as well, M.U.S.H.A stands for, I have it written down here, Metallic Uniframe Super Hybrid Armor. But you know, in Japan it was released as M.U.S.H.A Aleste. I don't know why they felt the need. I guess because M.U.S.H.A is a weird sounding word. So here they felt the need to have it be an acronym. I mean, I don't know what I need to say about M.U.S.H.A, except the fact that it was released in the summer of 1991 and was developed by Compile. I mean, it's one of the most well-regarded shooters on the Genesis. So I personally, like, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of M.U.S.H.A. I don't have it. It's probably like the best shooter that I don't own. Because for me personally, it's not worth the asking price because I don't like the game that much. Like, I hate the power-up system. You know, the way you shoot those things and these little power-up things come like raining down and you can't grab them. Well, it's the same reason I don't like Airbuster / Aeroblasters that much. But like, I freely admit, like, M.U.S.H.A is just a really good game. It just doesn't click with me personally. And I put on here, it's the 4th game in the Aleste series and the 2nd on a home console, if you wanted to know that. Number 20, all right, here's an interesting one. Number 20 is the first Road Rash. And, you know, it's funny because, you know, I caught a pretty good ration of crap for, you know, kind of dumping on Road Rash a little bit in the PlayStation launch video. I said something about it being the most overrated game ever. And, you know, the reason for that is just that anytime I tried to play Road Rash on the Genesis, I really couldn't get past the low frame rate and what I felt like were sort of sluggish controls. But, you know, since that time, I basically sat down and made myself play Road Rash. And I was actually surprised at how quickly those things stopped bothering you. Like, once you kind of wrap your head around just the way the controls work, and yes, they're a little bit sluggish, but you can just work around it. And, you know, there's nothing you can do about the frame rate, but it's not that big of a deal. I actually started having a really good time playing Road Rash. And as a result, my attitude about that game has changed completely. Came out, by the way, in September of 1991. Everybody knows it's an Electronic Arts game. I wrote this on the card just really as a question, not a statement. I said, is Road Rash the quintessential Genesis game? And you know, I don't mean that it's like the marquee Genesis game of the system. I mean, if you wanted to pick one game that I think, like, that's what the Sega Genesis was all about, Road Rash would be in the discussion. Like, Road Rash, maybe a Mortal Kombat game, I don't know. But, you know, Mortal Kombat was just a port from something else. So, so yeah, I just think that, like, I don't know how to put it into words, I guess, but to me it's just like, if you wanted to show, if somebody said, hey, what's the Sega Genesis like? What's that all about? You know, Road Rash would be an excellent game to show them and say, this is what it was like to own, you know, a Sega Genesis back in the day. Because of course you could show them Sonic, but, you know, Sonic's just a platformer. It's a wonderful platformer. It's probably my favorite Sega Genesis game. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, I guess. And that's really all I have to say about Road Rash at number 20. 19 is Phantasy Star 2. And I actually wrote nothing on the card because I don't even know what you need to say. The only thing I'm surprised about is that Phantasy Star 2 is all the way down at number 19. You know, I mean, obviously Phantasy Star was a marquee role-playing game series in the Sega Genesis. And, you know, even with the shortcomings of Phantasy Star 2 caused by the fact that Sega didn't want to pay for a larger ROM size, it's still an amazing game. So that is number 19. Number 18 is Contra Hardcore, which came out in August of 1994 and was developed by Konami. I mean, I'm not telling people anything I think they don't know, but I'll just reiterate, I guess. The North American version of Contra Hardcore is harder than the Japanese version. In Japan, you had a life bar where I think you could take 3 hits before you got killed. In North America, no life bar, 1-hit kills. And my understanding, or at least, you know, the popular reasoning for that is that in Japan, video game rentals are not legal. Here, of course, they are. And at some point, supposedly, Japanese developers started intentionally making the games harder that they sent over here so that people would want to buy them, right? Because you couldn't just go rent Contra Hardcore and beat it in a day or two unless you were like, you know, a real whiz playing computer games. So it's unfortunate that they did that. Of course, you can just play the Japanese version, or you know, if you have like an EverDrive or a Mister, or if you have a means of playing ROMs, right? Or maybe you just use emulators, like whatever. There's a ROM hack that you can apply to the Contra Hardcore ROM so that you're still playing the North American version, but it brings back the life bar. So that's pretty nice. The other thing I wrote down on here, some of the best visuals on the console. So there's a few games we're going to talk about here where I feel like if you were trying to show somebody the audio-visual abilities that the Genesis has, Contra Hardcore would definitely be one of those games. So Contra Hardcore number 18. Number 17, again, I didn't write anything. Golden Axe. What do I need to write about Golden Axe? If Sonic the Hedgehog is my favorite Genesis game, Golden Axe is my second favorite Genesis game. A wonderful beat 'em up, and for me, the best game in the series. So I don't know what else to say besides that. Number 16, we have, Golden Axe, January 1990 release. Number 16, another Konami game. This one is Castlevania Bloodlines. And as we all know, that was the only Castlevania game released on the Genesis, which is a shame. I put on here the controls seem like there may be a little bit of a step back from Super Castlevania 4, because remember, this game came out 2 years after Super Castlevania 4, but this game controls a little bit more like the NES versions. You don't have the same level of control as you do in Super Castlevania 4 as far as like whipping in all directions, and I'm not sure you can. I think in Bloodlines, once you jump, you can't sort of adjust your trajectory. Cool thing about Bloodlines, though, is that you have 2 characters to choose from, and what are their names? Oh yeah, John Morris has the whip, and Eric Lacard has like this spear thing, and they control very differently as far as the weapons go. You have a little bit more. You can do a few different things with the spear that you can't do with the whip. So that game, in my opinion, gives the game more replay value, because you can play through the game with John Morris, and then you can go play through the game again with Eric Lacard, and it's going to feel very different. And then I wrote on here, same composer as Symphony of the Night, in case you wanted to know that. And it takes place in 1917 instead of taking place in 1691. I don't know why that's important, but I wrote it down. Number 15, released around the same time, November of 93, is Aladdin. And one thing I put on here that's very important to note, in case you don't know it, Aladdin on the Super Nintendo and Aladdin on the Sega Genesis are completely different games, developed by completely different companies. The Super Nintendo game was a Capcom game, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And this was developed by Virgin Games USA. So, and it's the 3rd best-selling Genesis game, which I was a little bit surprised, I guess. I know the game was very popular, but if you had asked me to guess like what the top 5 best-selling Genesis games were, I don't think I would have guessed Aladdin. And the other thing I just thought was interesting, this game, as I said, came out in November of 93. The movie came out exactly a year earlier in November of 92. But I think I've talked about this multiple times on the show. It feels like back then, things had a little more staying power. Like you could release a movie tie-in game or something, you know, not so near to when the movie was released, and it wasn't a big deal. Whereas I feel like maybe if you did it now, it would be a little bit more awkward, or maybe not. Anyway, that was number 15. Number 14 is a very late Genesis release, October of 1995. I guess not very late, but kind of late. Developed by Blue Sky Software, and that is Vectorman. And this is another game where I haven't really played too much Vectorman. I don't know. I'm personally not in love with the way the game kind of controls, but it definitely looks really cool. And apparently, again, I don't know this for a fact, this is just what I've read, Vectorman was developed and released as a response to Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. Because when that game came out, I think people were saying like, oh, well, you could never do that on the Sega Genesis. And so then they released it. And then just quickly, in case, you know, if Blue Sky Software doesn't like ring a bell for you, I wrote down some of the other games that they developed. Ninja Golf on the 7800, probably the most famous 7800 game. Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football, Jurassic Park, Shadowrun, Starflight, and World Series Baseball. So they developed a lot of good games. And I put on here, it's a 2D game with pseudo 3D graphics. So some of the stuff looks polygonal, but it's not actually polygonal. And then I just wrote down cool music and nice variety of levels. It's a good game. Like I said, I haven't played it that much. You have to kind of get used to the controls a little bit. But it's definitely a quality game. And so it deserves its spot at number 14. At number 13, to me, you know, this one's kind of cheating a little bit as far as like, was this released in North America or not? And that is Treasure's Alien Soldier. So Alien Soldier came out in Japan and in Europe in 1995 on cartridge. It was never released here in North America on a cartridge, but it was available for a short time in 1997, 2 years later, on the Sega channel. So I guess technically it came out here, but I think that's kind of stretching things a little bit, but that's okay. It's a run and gun game. It's very similar to the other Treasure run and gun game on the Genesis, Gunstar Heroes. If you like one, you'll definitely like the other. I haven't played this game too terribly much, but from what I played of it, I was definitely impressed. So there you go, number 13. Number 12, this is another, what I would consider like, if you want to show off the ability of the Genesis to somebody, you might show them Thunder Force 3. Released in November of 1990, developed by Technosoft. We already talked about that game on my Genesis in 1990 episode. And I think I said it then, I'll say it again now. The first Thunder Force game, which was released on Japanese home computers, the MSX if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, was 100% overhead, sort of not really, kind of free roaming shooter. Then Thunder Force 2, which was a Genesis launch game, had the first level is an overhead shooter, the second level is side-scrolling, and then the third level goes back to overhead, fourth level side-scrolling. So every other level was different. With Thunder Force 3, they decided to just get rid of the overhead levels and just turn it into a purely scrolling shooter. Like I said, it has excellent graphics, excellent sound. It's a very difficult game, but that's because it's another one of these games that just requires a ton of memorization. So, like, you just have to remember, oh yeah, someone's going to pop out over here, someone's going to pop out over there. Because if you're just trying to play it without having it memorized, you're not going to have enough time to react to some of those things. But great game. Speaking of great games, at number 11, released, now I know for a fact, in December of 1989, because I mentioned in my Genesis in 1989 video that I wasn't quite sure if it came out in 89. Now I know that it did, is Revenge of Shinobi. And that's another one of my favorite Genesis games. It's got like this really nice early Genesis sort of flavor to it. It's the sequel to Shinobi, which was an arcade release and was ported or converted for the Sega Master System. Revenge of Shinobi, not a arcade release. This was specifically developed for the Sega Genesis, and everybody knows this already, but Yuzo Koshiro wrote the soundtrack for it. But just awesome side-scrolling action game. I don't even know what else to say. All of the Shinobi games on the Genesis are good, but Revenge of Shinobi is probably my personal favorite. Number 10, another game that I haven't spent too much time playing, another Konami game. This one released in August of 93, is Rocket Knight Adventures. And I haven't played it too much. I remember that it was featured on an episode of the Retro Game Squad podcast. so I learned a lot about it listening to that. You play as an opossum, Sparkster the opossum. So I don't know what Rocket Knight, I guess because he is a Rocket Knight, I don't really know. It's an action platformer. Once again, very nice graphics, great music, and also has really good control. If you're looking for another action platformer, which as you've seen, there's quite a few of them on this list, you can't go wrong with Rocket Knight Adventures at number 10. Number 9, we have the original Streets of Rage. Released in the summer of 1991, came out right about the same time as the first Sonic the Hedgehog. I was glad to see Streets of Rage at number 9, only because I think it is often overshadowed by Streets of Rage 2. And like for me personally, Streets of Rage 2 is the first one that I played. And so when I went and played Streets of Rage 1, I was just kind of like, oh, you know, the controls don't feel quite as nice, the animation's not quite as smooth, the sprites are all a little bit smaller, the game doesn't look quite as good, and so I kind of judged it a little bit too much and said, oh, I think, you know, Streets of Rage 2 is better, I'm not going to mess with this. But man, the first Streets of Rage is a great, great game. You just have to kind of accept the fact that it came out earlier, the controls are not quite as good, it doesn't look quite as good. The soundtrack, again, Yuzo Koshiro, the soundtrack is incredible. I mean, whether or not you want to say Streets of Rage 1 or Streets of Rage 2 has the better soundtrack, probably just depends on your personal taste, because they're both just excellent. Did I write anything else on here? It has a single-use special attack. In Streets of Rage 2, the special attack, you could use it as many times as you wanted, except that it would deplete your health. That's, you know, I guess a major difference that I wrote there. But the first Streets of Rage, a great game, and I'm glad to see that it's at number 9. Number 8, I believe, is the top-rated shooter on the Genesis, according to this top 25 list. Came out, I put January 93 ? Which to me means I was having a hard time nailing down the release date. That is Lightning Force, Quest for the Dark Star, which is maybe better known really as just Thunder Force 4. Like, I don't really understand why they chose to not call it Thunder Force 4 here in North America, but I don't know, that's what they did. Interestingly, this game was developed by a different development team at Technosoft to Thunder Force 3. I don't know why you would do that. Maybe they were just busy. Once again, it's all side-scrolling, like there's no overhead levels at all. One thing I forgot to mention about Thunder Force 3, I'll mention it again here, is one of the cool things it would let you do is pick the order of a certain number of the opening stages that you could play. And I don't remember how many it was in Thunder Force 3. In Thunder Force 4, you can pick the order of the first 4 stages. And then after that, they're just in a set order. I think there's 10 total stages. So it's just kind of neat because it lets you kind of switch things up a little bit. I think that's kind of cool. Once again, this would be like a showcase game for the Genesis. Like if you want to show off the Genesis to somebody, you show them Thunder Force 4 because it looks incredible. I put on here though, like is it better than Thunder Force 3 though? Like that I'm not too sure about. But I don't remember what number Thunder Force 3 was, but I mean, they were pretty close together, right? Number 7, coming out in June of 1991, as I had already mentioned, is the first Sonic the Hedgehog. Once again, I mean, literally the only thing I wrote on the card is probably my all-time favorite Genesis game. Sonic the Hedgehog, I've said this before, but is the reason that I got a Sega Genesis. Like my friend got a Sega Genesis right after Sonic became the pack-in game. I saw it and like fell in love. Like I have to have that, because at that time we were mostly playing computer games, and you weren't going to get that kind of speed, like scrolling speed on a computer game at that time, because early computers were not good at scrolling. But I just fell in love with the game, and for that reason, it's still my top Sega Genesis game, and it's it's probably, if I made a top 5 list of my all-time favorite video games, Sonic would be on it. Not because I think the game itself is that awesome, like compared to like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but just the nostalgia I have wrapped up in that game is crazy. So I'm glad to see it at number 7. Number 6, so I didn't write anything on this card either. This is a game I have not played at all, but I know how well regarded it is by pretty much everybody, is Phantasy Star 4. So I've extensively played the first 2 Phantasy Star games. I have never played at all Phantasy Star 3 or 4. So I don't really have anything to say about it, except that I'm not surprised to see it at number 6. Number 5, this is kind of an interesting one. It's Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. So you guys might remember, I'm sure you all do, that at some point after Sonic 3 came out, they released the Sonic and Knuckles cart, which was like a lock-on cartridge. And you could plug any of the other Sonic the Hedgehog games into it and add a little bit of content or functionality, if you will, to those games. So Sonic 3 came out in February of 94. Sonic and Knuckles came out in October of 94. But from what I read, apparently the game that is created when you take Sonic and Knuckles and plug Sonic 3 into it, that package was what Sonic Team wanted Sonic 3 to be. So when you play it that way, you could say that you're playing the definitive version of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So I put it, when you do that, you merge the zones of each game and add some new features. And that's about it. So that is Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles at number 5. Number 4 is, and this is another game that I have not played nearly as much as the one we already talked about, is Shinobi 3 Revenge of the Ninja Master. I have played the game, just I haven't like really sat down and like dug into it too deeply. But I mean, from what I played of it, I thought like it was, pretty awesome. And really, let me see what I wrote on here. Okay, it says on here, direct sequel to Revenge of Shinobi. Because you also had Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi, that came out in 1990, I think. And that game plays quite a bit differently to Revenge of Shinobi. If you play Shinobi 3, it really feels more like the follow-up to Revenge of Shinobi. But everything about it is just better, as far as like it looks better, it controls better. It's just a better game. I put on here the controls are a little bit less stiff. That's kind of one thing about Revenge of Shinobi. It feels a little bit stiff. Shinobi 3, it's a little more fluid and it feels a little bit better. And I put gorgeous, I even underlined the word gorgeous graphics. So another showcase game. Shinobi 3, on the other hand, the music was not composed by Yuzo Koshiro. So that doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just not Yuzo Koshiro score. Number 3, September 1993, developed by Treasure. I already mentioned this game, is Gunstar Heroes. Yet another side-scrolling action game, as like I said, look at how many of them are. So obviously a very popular genre. This was the very first game, supposedly, from what I read, developed by Treasure. And I thought that was kind of cool. Gunstar here, I'll say it, people can throw their tomatoes. Gunstar Heroes and Alien Soldier, I can see that they're great games. I can see how much people love them. They just don't personally click with me. So I'm not trying to say it's a bad game or that I even don't like it. I guess I am kind of saying I don't like. When I play it, it's just, there's something about it that doesn't make me want to keep playing. I don't know. It's just a personal preference kind of thing. Number 2, again, I didn't even bother writing anything on the card because what do you have to say about Streets of Rage 2? As long as I live, I will say that Streets of Rage 2 is the best beat-em-up game ever made. If I was going to make a top 5 list, the top 5 best beat-em-up games, probably all 3 Streets of Rage games would be on that list. So it's the game that got me into Streets of Rage. It's a game that I played, very early after I got back into retro gaming, and I just love it. Again, it would be a top 5 Genesis game for me. Sonic the Hedgehog, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage 2. Came out, by the way, in December of 1992. And then the number 1 game on the Sega Genesis, according to the people of the internet, if you haven't figured it out by now, like what game have I not mentioned yet out of the top 25, is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And came out November 21st, 1992. It was a big worldwide release. Everybody in the world got the game on the same day. I believe it was called Sonic Tuesday for Sonic 2. And I mean, I don't know what I need to say about it. I mean, it's a wonderful game, and I love it. As I've said before, I don't like that you have tails following you around, but you can just turn off tails, and that's what I do when I play the game. But not at all surprised to see it at number 1. Like, there's a few games here in the top 5. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised if Streets of Rage 2 had been number 1. I wouldn't have even really been that surprised if Gunstar Heroes had been the number 1 game. But there you go. That is the crowdsourced top 25 Sega Genesis games according to the internet. Thank you once again to Ian for putting that list together for me. So before I get into my 10 games, I just thought it would be interesting to talk about a few games that didn't make that list. And again, the Sega Genesis had, I wrote it on here, 707. I put official in quotations because I'm actually including games like the Accolade games, which were unlicensed. Like, to me, that it's still a game that got released that wasn't like some bootleg or something on the Genesis. So it's sort of a semi-official release. But 707 video games, the top 25 makes up 3.5% of the Genesis library. So you're still going to have a lot of what I would consider to be marquee games for the Genesis that just don't make it into that top 25, you know, just by virtue of the fraction of that is, you know, a fraction of the library as a whole. So, and so these are games that are also not going to be on my top 10 list, just because my list are like my 25 favorite games after we get rid of these 10, my top 10 favorite games after we get rid of these 25. So I'm not saying that any of these games aren't great games, but they don't make my sort of favorites list. The first one, Toe Jam and Earl 1 and 2. I just kind of would have expected to see a Toe Jam and Earl game make it to the top 25. Next, you see there are no fighting games, and that I'm actually very surprised about. Like, the fact that maybe Mortal Kombat 2 didn't make the list is a little bit surprising to me. Even something like Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition, which I know Street Fighter aficionados don't like that game, but I liked it well enough because I'm not, I guess, that picky. I don't really know. I'm just surprised that there were no fighting games at all that made the list. Next is Echo the Dolphin, which I'm not shocked that it isn't on the list, but I wouldn't have been shocked if it was either. But I don't know, it's weird because to me, Echo the Dolphin is like a marquee Sega Genesis game, but at the same time, I've never really talked to anybody that was in love with that game. But it's like, oh, the game is, you know, it's beautiful and they tried to do something different with the gameplay. But does anybody out there really love Echo the Dolphin? I don't know. But at the same time, if it had been on the list, I wouldn't have been surprised at all to see it there. Next, Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, like either one of them. I'm surprised they didn't crack the top 25. One game I am glad didn't crack the top 25 because I don't particularly care for it is Strider. Only because I often see people heaping praise on Strider, and I just personally kind of don't get it. I think the game's not really all that great. Flashback, I also put on there, Flashback, The Quest for Identity, just because I think it's a really good game, and I feel like that's the kind of game that in general I think people do think is really good, and so I'm just surprised it didn't make the list. And then lastly, hold on, I'm gonna flip that over, sorry. Lastly, I'm going to mention, well, one thing I should say before I say this. You have to imagine this top 25 list is not like the top 25 list from back then, which I think would look quite a bit different. So this is a top 25 list that was basically compiled of the opinions of people who, in the modern day, are still playing and enjoying the Sega Genesis, right? So you have a lot of games that were popular back then that aren't popular with the kinds of people that today are still playing Sega Genesis. And for that reason, you notice that even though the Genesis is a system that has always been known for sports games, there's not a single sports game on this top 25 list, which it just makes you think, is this a really truly representative top 25 list or isn't it? But I don't know how you could make it one unless you could somehow incorporate you know, some sort of top lists that were generated back when the Genesis was still a current gen system. So now with that all being said, we're going to start my next 10 list. And I'll just mention these are not in any order at all. Well, the order they're in is I thought it would be an interesting order to talk to them or talk about them in. This isn't some sort of countdown or anything like that. So the first game I've got here is Starflight. And I'm surprised at how little you hear about Starflight. This was a 1991 Electronic Arts release, but was a conversion, I guess if you want to call it that, of a 1986 IBM PC game. And Starflight is kind of a hard game to describe. It's this open world, like space exploration game. Like you start the game and you're just like a starship captain or whatever, and you have this ship that is pretty modest in its abilities. You have to go like hire or whatever your crew, and then you can go out and explore the galaxy. Basically, you go to other planets in your star system, and then you leave your star system and go to other star systems and explore the planets there. The main thing you're doing at the beginning of the game is mining for minerals. So like you have to enter orbit around a planet, which you just literally drive your ship up to a planet, and you have to kind of hit it at the right angle, and you'll automatically get like sucked into orbit. And then you can basically tell, I think it's your navigation officer or whatever, you want to land. And then the view switches, and like your ship is just falling because of the gravity down to the planet's surface, and you have to kind of use these retro rockets to adjust the velocity with which you're falling, because if you hit too hard, you'll damage your ship, or maybe you can even destroy your ship. And then once you do that, you have like this little rover that you can deploy onto the planet's surface, and what that rover is basically for is going around and collecting minerals, or sometimes you're visiting some sort of site. At the beginning of the game, really the point of the game at the beginning of the game is to mine minerals to take back to your star base and sell, so that you can earn credits to upgrade your ship. But you also have, your ship requires like basically gas to run. It's a mineral called like Endurium, and you have to buy that from the star base. So you can literally run out of Endurium while you're out in cruising the galaxy, and if you do, you literally have to just reset your Genesis, because it's like it's not going to tell you game over, but your game is over because you're stranded. But you play the game and you're exploring around, but you start finding these little hints like, hey, you need to go over here and check this thing out or check that thing out. And sort of slowly this storyline starts to kind of bubble up to the surface, and you start realizing that there's more for you to do than just go mine minerals, because that would get boring. And I mean, I don't want to give up too much away, I guess, but it kind of turns out that like there's some really bad stuff happening to the star systems in your little universe there, and you have to stop it from getting worse. You also meet other alien races. If what I'm describing sounds very similar to Star Control 2, it's because the game is very similar to Star Control 2. And in fact, one of the main guys that worked on Starflight, the original Starflight, on the PC, I suppose, ended up going and working on Star Control 2. So if you like one game, you'll like the other. I also wrote on here, in some ways it's kind of reminiscent of Trade Wars, in that you're kind of cruising the galaxy and buying and selling resources. And I just put, it's a space-based open world adventure game, which is, I think, true. It really is like a sandbox game, and to have that on the Genesis is pretty amazing. Oh, there's also, this is kind of cool, but like when you're going around the galaxy, there's like wormholes. Oh, and when you're driving around, if you're not in a star system, you're sort of out in the galaxy, it tells you your coordinates. And you will end up running into these wormholes that suck you in, and then you come out somewhere else. And when that happens, you want to write down the coordinates, because you can always use those wormholes to get around. And the reason you want to do that, again, is because you have like limited energy with which to move your ship around. So anytime you can save some gas, basically, by using a wormhole, you want to do that. I'll mention just briefly sort of my personal history with Starflight. So it came out in 91. I didn't get it in 91. I probably got it in like 93, if I had to guess. At that time, I was a teenager. I was super into Star Trek, mostly The Next Generation. Like I watched Star Trek The Next Generation like every night on TV because they would show reruns. And I found Starflight at a video rental store in like the bin with the previously played games. And it must have been like less than $10 because I was able to convince my mom to buy it for me. But I completely bought it because just looking at the box, which I actually have right here, it just looked like the kind of game where, I don't know if this is going to focus, but too much glare. It just looks like the kind of game where if you're into Star Trek, it seems like you would like this game. And so I bought it just based on that. And it didn't let me down. To me, it kind of feels a lot like you're playing a Star Trek game that just isn't a Star Trek game. So I don't even know what else to say about it. I burned a lot of time playing Starflight. Like when I was a teenager, if it was a Saturday or a Sunday and I didn't have anywhere to go, I could sit in front of my TV in the living room and play Starflight literally for hours. The other game, which actually I'm going to grab that one too. This is very much related to Starflight for me in that I picked this game up in the same way. I found it, previously played or whatever at a rental store, and I bought it because of its space theme, because I was really into Star Trek, and that is Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday. This game plays very, very differently to Starflight, although in some ways not so much, but so this is, if you can see on the box here, this is an SSI game. They're, probably best known for the SSI Gold Box games on the PC, which were all these Advanced Dungeons and Dragons games. So this plays a lot like an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. So this is a role-playing game, but it's an American-style role-playing game, which just means, like, when I think of American-style role-playing games, like the Ultima series, I would lump into that. They have sort of the rule set for the game seems like it's based on Dungeons and Dragons. I've never actually played a Dungeons and Dragons, like actual, pen and paper game, so I don't know too much about it. But the battle system, for example, in Buck Rogers, much like if you were to play like Ultima on the NES, Ultima Exodus, you get this battle screen, but you can like move your guys around. And that's the way Buck Rogers works. Like you have random battles, but then you're on this battle screen where it's just this big area, and your team starts out where they start out, and the enemies start out where they start out, and moving your dudes around is like part of playing the game. Like you can't leave all your guys bunched up together. Because a lot of the enemies, for example, have like area effect weapons like grenade launchers and stuff, where everybody within some certain radius is going to get messed up by that. So you want to get your guys all spread out. The different weapons in the game, like the enemies use the same weapons that you use. So when you defeat enemies, whatever weapons they had, you can loot their dead bodies, right? So whatever they had, you can take. And there's only a few different types of weapons in the game, and there's different like levels. Like you can have like a laser pistol, but there's like different levels of laser pistol. Like some of them are better than others. And so when you fight more advanced enemies, they might have those more advanced weapons, but then when you kill them and they drop them, now it belongs to you instead. So that's nice. One thing I'll say though, even though it's a Buck Rogers game, I don't see what it has to do with Buck Rogers. Like Buck Rogers makes a couple of like awkward appearances in the game. Like you're not playing as Buck Rogers. You're just like whoever. Like you name your characters whatever you want to name them, just like if you were playing Ultima. But then like randomly, like Buck Rogers will show up and just be like, "Hey guys, you're doing a really good job," and then leave. And I'm like, okay, I don't really understand why they even bothered getting a Buck Rogers license. So most of the game takes place in like different locations where you're moving your guy around like a normal role-playing game. But then one thing that's really cool is pretty early in the game, you get a spaceship, and you can get in your spaceship and like, cruise around. I think you're limited, if I remember, I don't remember. I've beat the game, but it's been a while. You're limited as far as how far you can go. It's nothing like Starflight, but you can go to like different planets, or you can go to like asteroid belts, or there's other space stations you can go to, but there's random battles out in space too, but they're totally different than the random battles that you would get into if you were just a dude walking around. Like instead, it's like two ships doing battle with each other, and you can destroy that ship, or you can like, you have to keep getting closer to the ship and like knocking out some of their systems, but then you can board the ship. And then it goes more to like, now you're just walking around in the ship that you boarded, and if you kill the crew, I guess, if I remember correctly, I think you can take the ship and sell it. I don't remember. You get something like really good if you are able to board a ship and take it over. I don't remember what, but it's a really, really cool game in my opinion. It's a pretty short game. For a role-playing game, I think I beat it in about 10 hours or something, so it's really not too bad. But I can't recommend it highly enough. Now we get to the part of the show where everybody's going to shut it off, because the next game on my list is NHL 94. So like I said, I think it's crazy that there's no sports games on this list, just because these were some of the best-selling games and most beloved games on the Genesis back when it was current. And so how can you not talk about sports games if you're going to talk about some of the best games on the Genesis? And to me, probably there are a couple of games I can think of, you know, that would go back and forth. Is this the best game or is that the best game? I do have a few sports games to talk about. The first one is NHL 94. Obviously, I think enough of NHL 94 that I made a whole video just about that one game. So, I mean, I don't know what to say about it. I don't want to bore people. It came out in October of 1993, developed by High Score Productions. It was the third NHL game from EA on the Genesis. You had the original NHL Hockey, then you had NHL PA Hockey 93, then you had NHL 94. There's no fighting in NHL 94. Of course, NHL PA 93, you could make people's heads bleed. That was very popular. This has authentic organ music. By authentic, I don't mean if you play the Sega CD version, it's actually literally recordings of organ music. But if you play the cartridge version, it's, you know, it's digital fake organ music, but it's specific to whatever arena you're playing in, and that's pretty cool. For the first time in the series, you had one-timers, which I think are important because they happen a lot in hockey. They got kind of abused a little bit too much. And it's fully licensed, so the player names and the team names. But awesome game, NHL 94. The next game, this is definitely one of my favorite games on the Genesis. That is Mega Turrican. Now, I know I talk a lot about Turrican games, but I can totally understand where somebody might have tried the original Turrican on the Genesis or Turrican 2 as Universal Soldier and decided like, yeah, these games really are not for me for whatever reason. But even if you feel that way, two games you should check out are Mega Turrican on the Genesis and Super Turrican on the Super Nintendo. These play a lot more like a standard side-scrolling action game. I think they're less frustrating than the first two Turrican games. And I'm saying that as somebody who loves the first two Turrican games as well. But I think that Mega Turrican is much more approachable if you're somebody that just loves, like, say, Contra and games like that. Beautiful graphics, I would say another showcase game for the Genesis, both in terms of its graphics and its music. The music for this game was written by Chris Hulsbeck, who also did the first two Turrican games. Interestingly, Mega Turrican, so the first two Turrican games were home computer games that got ported to the Genesis. Mega Turrican was made for the Genesis and then got converted over to the Amiga as Turrican 3. So it went the other way. I've played both games. They're both really good. As you would expect, the Amiga version has better quality music. Like it's the same music as far as it's like the same songs or whatever, but the Amiga has better audio hardware than a Genesis does, so it sounds better if you play it that way. And I wrote on here, I would way rather play this than Contra Hardcore. Very true. Next is my personal favorite shooter on the Genesis. This is really not going to be a surprise to anybody, but I wanted to quickly kind of point out, everybody thinks of the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine when they think of shooters. But the Genesis, and I'm even just talking about here in North America, the Genesis was really no slouch when it came to shooters. And the reason I think that that's the case, and I've said this before, but there was this certain golden age of shooters. And I think it's like the late 80s and like 90, 91. And after that, I think it started to peter out. And that doesn't mean you didn't still have great shooters coming out, especially like bullet hell type shooters, as you got into the 90s. But there was this period of time where shooters were, I think, like a Call of Duty game is now. It's just like, it was like this dude bro game to play, or genre to play. And that's why, like, if you watch my Sega Genesis in 1990 video, like, how many shooters that I ended up covering, because they were just coming out like back to back to back to back. And so, like, I wrote down, like, this is not a definitive or comprehensive list, I don't think, of shooters on the Genesis, but I wrote down Insector X, Phelios, Steel Empire, Elemental Master, Gyarus, Biohazard Battle, Granada, Sagaya, Arrow Flash, Whip Rush, Vapor Trail, Forgotten Worlds, Ride and Trad, Airbuster, Battle Squadron. And what's missing from that list, of course, the Thunder Force games, because we already talked about those. M.U.S.H.A, we talked about that. And the Toaplan games. And just sort of coincidentally, that Toaplan shooter collection just came out, which is an awesome selection of games. And that had 4 games in it. You have Zero Wing, which did not come out in North America, which is too bad. You have Fire Shark, which came out in America. I can't remember who the publisher was of that, but it's a Toaplan game. Then you have Hellfire, which, in my personal opinion, Hellfire is the best of the 4 Toaplan Genesis / Mega Drive shooters. But if I'm being honest, my favorite of those games is the 4th one, which is Truxton. And I know that Truxton sort of became more like meme famous because of Classic Game Room, but it honestly is a really good game. And it's the game it's probably the shooter I've spent the most time playing on the Genesis. It's kind of like playing Ghouls and Ghosts. It's like comfort food, or Sonic the Hedgehog. Like, anytime I want to play a game, I don't know what, I just want to relax, I can throw on some Truxton, and it's like, putting on your favorite pair of pajamas or something. I don't really know. I just love the game, but it's just an example of why this is my top 10 favorite games, not including the 25. Not what I think are the best, because I'm saying what I think is the best. I think Hellfire is a better game than Truxton, but Truxton is the one that's my favorite. So next, another sports game. So I picked, this is in my opinion the best football game on the Genesis, and that is John Madden Football 93. But that actually encompasses 2 games, which I will show you here. So here is normal John Madden Football 93. But then they also released, in very limited quantities, John Madden Football Championship Edition, excuse me, which, by the way, this was given to me by Michael in Lake Oswego, Oregon. So once again, thank you, Michael. Extremely generous. The difference here is that John Madden Football 93 is just a normal football game. It has like the teams and, I guess sort of the rosters from that year. This game is not licensed, so it's like not the real teams. It just has them by city. And then, the rosters, it's not the actual players. It doesn't use their name, but when they make these games, they'll use the same player numbers and they'll try to give those players the same attributes. So, back then having a game, sports game be licensed was not as big of a deal. John Madden Football Championship Edition, these are like either championship teams throughout the history of the NFL, or some teams that didn't win the Super Bowl but were just really good teams that year. Like maybe they were like the AFC champion, but they lost the Super Bowl, but they'll still stick them in here. People say this was a rental store exclusive because it says it right in the box, rental store exclusive. But I believe that at some point later, after this was sent out to rental stores, you could buy this through the mail from EA. There's too many copies of this game floating around that are in too nice a condition that there's no way that this was literally only ever a rental store exclusive. Kind of a pricey game though. But, you know, I know it's a sports game, but John Madden Football is one of the most important franchises of all time. And it really got its start on the Genesis. I know there was a John Madden Football game for the Apple II, but I kind of almost don't even include that one. And then, of course, there was the Madden series was also on the Super Nintendo. Not necessarily quite as good. But for me, I think this is the best version of the game in the Genesis is 93. I put on here, though, you still can't play a complete season. I think that started with 94, Madden 94, and that's kind of lame, but not that big of a deal. I put on here last game using the original engine. So if you play Madden 94, the game just looks and feels a little bit different, and I prefer the original Maddens. But for me personally, I could play the original John Madden Football or 92 or 93, and I would be happy. But among those, I think that 93 is the best. That's all I really have to say about Madden. Next, here's another game that I feel like nobody ever talks about, at least not that much, and I don't understand why. This game came out in 1989. It's a movie tie-in game, and it's Rambo 3. So obviously I talked about that game in the Genesis in 1989 video, and I mean, I just think that it's a great game. And like the only thing I feel like it's really known for is it has these boss battles where, well, I should step back for a second. So it's sort of like this overhead, I don't know, it's at kind of a weird angle. Is it isometric? I forgot. Or no, it's oblique, I think. I'm getting technical. It doesn't really matter, but we'll just call it an overhead run and gun game. So something like Mercs or Shock Troopers or something like that. But obviously it's based on Rambo 3. I assume it is. I mean, I have never seen Rambo 3, the movie, so I don't know how closely it follows the plot. But really fun game. Like I said it in that video, you can only play it single player, which is kind of a bummer because it'd be a fun game to play 2-player. But I mean, that's the way Rambo is, right? Rambo's like a lone wolf. So if you could play 2-player, it would kind of not make sense. It has one-hit deaths, which is kind of annoying. But the game gives you something like 5 continues. So what would that would be like 15 lives. And it's a pretty short game. I forgot how many levels it has, something like 5 or 6. And it's not too difficult. Like if you're willing to just use up all your continues, you can beat the game without it being too much of a big deal. Oh, but so I was going to say, the thing the game seems like it's kind of known for is there's sort of like these boss battles at the end of a couple of the stages where the view changes and you're like behind Rambo. And, you know, I mean, one of the things Rambo is kind of famous for, at least I think it was started in First Blood Part 2, was having those explosive arrows. And so, you know, at one point, you're fighting against this helicopter that's like shooting its machine guns at you, and you have to shoot it with these explosive arrows. But it's a different view because you're like behind Rambo, and it's pretty neat. And then later, you do the exact same thing, except you're fighting against a tank. So, it's got digitized versions of Kurtwood Smith. You know, I forgot. I don't remember what his character's name is in Rambo, but you know, he's Red Foreman / Clarence Boddicker, and he had whatever his role was in Rambo 3. Digitized version of him, and then Rutger Hauer. But I'm saying it actually shows the actors' faces, so I guess they got paid. I don't really know, but I think it's the second level of Rambo 3 where you have to, it's like, oh, you have to rescue this spy or whatever, but it's Rutger Hauer, and so when you finally rescue him, like he pops up on the screen and, you know, tells you some stuff. But yeah, Rambo 3 is a really fun game. Like if you're looking for, it's like, you know, well, today's Friday, but you won't see this video till tomorrow, but it's like a Friday night or a Saturday night, and like you don't know what to play. Rambo 3 would be like a perfect game to sit there and just like drink some beer and check out. This next game, I don't have a whole lot to say about this game. You know, I basically came up with 9 games. We still have 3 games to go, by the way, but I just put this one here. I had 9 games that I was just sure I wanted to talk about, and the 10th game was kind of a floater. And I ended up picking this one because another genre that you see not being represented here are racing games. And there were a lot of good racing games on the Genesis, like I wrote them down here: Super Monaco GP, Super Hang-On, Outrun, Virtua Racing, Super Off-Road, and Rock and Roll Racing. And that's not a comprehensive list. That's just some examples that I wrote down. The game I picked, I didn't have this game back then, but I remember renting it, is Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP 2. And I rented it, you know, sometime after it came out in September of '92, purely because Senna was on the cover, and that made me think like, ooh, I want to check that out. I think it's an impressive game, personally, for a 16-bit racing game, especially on the Genesis. It runs faster than the first Super Monaco GP. It follows, it has the 16 tracks, the 16 races that made up the 1991 F1 season. So I mean, it's just an F1 game. It's just not licensed by F1. It's licensed. They licensed, you know, Ayrton Senna's likeness and whatnot. Apparently, he had quite a bit of input into the game. There are some tracks, aside from the 16 F1 tracks, there's some tracks that he designed that you can race on the side. It's just a cool game, but like I said, I wanted the racing genre to be represented, and so that's the one that I picked. This next one is the last sports game that I have. I'm not really going to say a whole lot about it. It's PGA Tour Golf 3. There were 5 PGA Tour Golf games on the Genesis. You had 1, 2, 3, PGA Tour 96, and then you had one called PGA European Tour, which was just PGA Tour Golf 2 with different courses and different players. With the exception of PGA Tour 96, all those PGA Tour games in the Genesis are great games, but PGA Tour 3 was just the best one. So if you were only going to play one, that would be the one to play. I've said it many times, I'll say it again. I don't really care that much about golf. I don't watch golf on TV. I certainly don't play golf. But I think golf video games are really good. Like, you don't have to like golf to like golf games. Like, I like them because you know exactly what you have to do, but you have to actually execute it, right? I mean, it's just a 3-click swing system, and then you have to adjust, okay, there's wind coming this way, so I have to aim a little bit that way, or I'm trying to get around these trees, so I have to, you know, do a little of intentional, you know, fading or drawing or whatever. But you have to then actually do it. And so then once you take your shot and it doesn't go where you wanted it to go, you know, you can't get frustrated because you know why it didn't. It's like, well, you know, one of those clicks was a little bit too late, or I didn't adjust enough for the wind. And I don't know, for that reason, I just find golf games like very immersive. Like the Hot Shot golf games are great, or Mario Golf. But these PGA Tour games for the Genesis, I think, are great. At some point, golf games stopped using the 3-click swing system, which I don't like. Like, some of them now use like the analog stick, and I don't care for that at all. But I mean, the staying power of the 3-click swing system is such that a lot of games still use it today. And I don't believe that PGA Tour invented that, because there were NES games that use the 3-click swing system too. But anyway, if you're ever thinking about checking out a golf game on the Genesis, PGA Tour Golf 3 is the one that you want to check out. So this last game, I only wrote down the one game, but really you could take it to mean the whole series. This game is Desert Strike. But there were several games in the sort of Strike series, if you want to call them that. You had Desert Strike. I didn't write them down here, did I? No. But so I don't remember the sequence. But you had like Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike, Soviet Strike, and Nuclear Strike. And I don't remember. 3 of those games came out on the Genesis. For sure, Desert Strike and Jungle Strike were Genesis games. But I can't remember the third one. I don't know. I don't remember. It really doesn't matter. But these were very ubiquitous games back in the day. Like I wrote down on here, these are the consoles that Desert Strike, the first one, came out on. Genesis, Super Nintendo, Master System, Game Gear, Lynx, Game Boy, and home computer. So I remember renting Desert Strike for the Genesis and really liking it. And then I actually ended up buying it a few years later for the Atari Lynx. But they're very unique, in my opinion, games that play really nicely. I guess it's sort of a, it's this third-person isometric perspective, and you're flying a helicopter. In Desert Strike, you're only flying a helicopter, but subsequent to that, the other games, you can do other things too. Like you can get out of the helicopter and hop into something else or whatever. But it's just this third-person isometric perspective where, you know, you're just flying around. Like, you know, each mission you have a series of objectives. And you can open a map and it'll tell you, like, okay, you need to do this, 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 this. Like, you have to go blow up some communications towers. Then you have to go save some hostages. And you have to go blow up this enemy headquarters. Or do, you know, whatever it tells you you have to do. But all over the place are, like, dudes shooting at you with guns. Like there's, like, you know, missile installments shooting missiles at you. There's anti-aircraft guns shooting at you. And you can shoot all those things too. But you have limited ammo and you have limited fuel. So you kind of can't screw around too much. There's some, you know, sprinkled around in each level are some fuel containers that you can pick up to, you know, restore all of your fuel. And then there are ammo pickups and I think armor pickups as well, because, you know, you have like armor on your helicopter, and so you can take a certain number of hits without blowing up. But at some point your armor will get low, but then you can refill your... I think you actually refill your armor, if I remember correctly, by picking up hostages and taking them back to the aircraft carrier, and that's how you get more armor. But I think all the Strike games are really good. I wrote down Desert Strike because, again, it's the first one, and it's the one that I had back then. It's interesting, we talked about Streets of Rage 3 and how, you know, Sega sort of self-censored it. And then you had EA release this where, you know, I just wrote down, you know, like there's a thing where someone's getting boiled in oil, right? Because you're fighting against like Middle Eastern, you know, militants or whatever. And so there's a lot of stereotypical stuff in there. It's just kind of like, it doesn't bother me, but whatever. The other thing I wrote down, just because sometimes you hear people talk about EASN, the Electronic Arts Sports Network, which was sort of like, you know, the little presentation aspect of the early EA Sports games, right? Like if you play one of the early hockey games, it has this EASN presentation, which I believe they had to stop doing because they got sued by ESPN. But Desert Strike has something called EANN, which is the Electronic Arts News Network, because they're like reporting on the war in the Middle East. And, you know, and then you're going and doing your thing, which, you know, just to bring that up, I guess, you know, another thing, this game came out not too long after the Persian Gulf War. And so I guess it seemed kind of topical or something. But, yeah, that's the last one I have written down. But, you know, like I said, if you get like Jungle Strike or something, like those are also good. I've played the PlayStation versions because there were the two games that didn't come out on the 16-bit platforms came out on the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. And I've played them, but not nearly as much. And I remember at least one of them kind of thinking like, I don't know if this one's really that good. But any of the Genesis games I think are fun. Like Jungle Strike is definitely also worth playing. So that's it. That is my next 10. So, you know, you guys can feel free to tell me how I'm wrong with some of my picks, or how could you not mention something else. There are many other Sega Genesis games that I absolutely love, but that just didn't make my next 10 list. So that's going to do it for this episode of CGQ Plus. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.